I wanted to ask you a question first. Ice cream? Not goldfish? Yeah, well, you'd have to be the cat to like that, so I guess. This is an interesting thing. I always like what Oscar Wilde had to say about this. He said, I can resist anything but temptation. And isn't that true about most of us? We can resist almost anything unless we're tempted to do it. Problem we're in. But when are you most vulnerable to temptation? When you're weak, okay? When you're awake? Yeah, I don't think I've been tempted when I've been asleep. I hadn't thought about that. That's one of those questions that's absolutely correct and completely ridiculous. I don't know what. When you're alone, okay. Sometimes being alone is a difficult thing because you don't have any social pressure as well. So, Sheila, what's it? When you're stressed, okay. That tends to be a hard thing to do as well. When you're under stress to do that. We're going to look a little bit at this concept today, but I think it's interesting what Dietrich Bonhoeffer said. Bonhoeffer was a German churchman during the Second World War, and in Germany he resisted Hitler, and for that he earned a spot in prison, and he was executed 30 days before the Allies liberated Germany. But one of the things he says, Satan does not fill us with hatred of God, but with forgetfulness of God. In other words, when we have problems in life, it's because we have forgotten God is there, exists, and has ideas. Think about the Garden of Eden. In the Garden of Eden, when Satan comes to Adam and Eve, he comes to Eve especially, and he says, you can be like God. She forgot about God and started wanting to be that. That's the problem of temptation. We tend to forget God. And so today, as we get to Joseph, there are a couple of things just quickly in review, but it has something to do with today as well. You remember last week, we ended the lesson with him being sold into slavery by the Midianite traders by his brothers. And they sold him for 20 shekels of silver, and it says they took Joseph to Egypt. And then it says the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of the Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. Here is a boy who all of a sudden, in just a matter of a few days, a week maybe, has his whole world upside down. Pampered son, and now he's on a slave block, bought and sold and treated like cattle. So let me ask you, how do you think that affected Joseph? Okay. Question why would have to cross his mind. Okay. Okay. Yeah, he didn't understand the unfairness of it, if you will. Okay. Sheila? Okay. There would be a tremendous amount of loneliness for a lot of reasons. I want you to think about the changes in Joseph's life. We tend not to look at everything together, but I think it's good to do this. Joseph has gone through a series of changes, dramatic changes, serious changes of his life. He went from protected and pampered son to suddenly he becomes a slave. Those are polar opposites. Suddenly you can go wherever you want to. Now you can't go anywhere that you want to. He is in the midst of total strangers. Think about what it must have been like headed from Dothan to Egypt. He doesn't really know where he's going, first of all. They don't tell him. They don't give him an itinerary. Say, oh, by the way, we're going to be in Egypt in about a week and a half. He's just cattle at that point. And there's no telling who the mix was in that. Every time the traders went through various places, they'd collect more and more slaves, and they may have been Assyrians, they may have been Babylonians, they may have been all kinds of races, all kinds of languages, and so you don't have anything to connect you to anybody. He finds himself in a different culture. The food they eat's different. The things they do different. In his father's household, they talked about God and the God of Abraham and Isaac and the promises of God. Now there was none of that. He's got something else going on. And so, I mean, he's in this different culture. He has a different language. I'm always, we kind of take language for granted. Unless you're in an international airport. There was one year, it was 1999, I'd gone to Lithuania because we had a missionary there, and I got lost in Vilnius. Now, every street sign is in Lithuanian. Lithuanian is the next to the hardest language ever to learn. I didn't want to mess with it. And so every street sign's that way. If you asked for directions, you'd be answered in Lithuanian. I came across a beggar who wanted money. So I gave him a little bit, and he told me off in Lithuanian. I didn't know what he said, but I know what he meant. And so, but all you want is you want someone to talk your language. A voice, I mean, in a crowd like that, if you're in a crowd of foreigners and suddenly someone speaks English, your ear perks up the way it is. He is also has an undetermined future. He doesn't know where he's going. He started off life knowing what was going to happen. He grew up in the household. He knew what was going to take place. He had history. Now what do? What's going to happen to your life? Is it going to end quickly? Is it going to end brutally? How is it going to work? And how that's going to happen? And so, and the question also is, would you be more or less susceptible to temptation in those circumstances? Okay, that's true. I want to show you something. You may have seen this or not. A couple PhDs got credit for what their graduate students did. This is called the Holmes-Ray stress test. I don't know if you've ever seen it or even care, but that's okay. If you'll look, and somehow my screen has gotten moved off to the side there, but I'll show you. The number one, by the way, what this says, this is a measure of stress based upon changes in your family lifestyle or in your personal lifestyle. And so the greatest one, the death of a spouse, counts for 100 points. And divorce counts for 73. And death of a close family member is 63. Marriage is 50. It's almost to death of a spouse. I don't make judgments. You have retirement, which ought to be a great thing. But if you're retired, you know that now your world is upside down. You don't know what to do. And so if you look at these, the more you have of this list, and you can find this online if you want to, the greater the number of events that have happened in the last year will indicate the stress level you're either in or will be, and the danger that poses. I know that because it kind of happened to us back 10 years ago. My father-in-law died from dementia. And he died from something else, but the dementia is what killed him. Well, Vicki and I would go up there every night. Now, if you've ever gone to a memory care unit, it is like entering the twilight zone. Reality is suspended. We go up there for a couple of hours every night. We come back home, and our head was spinning. We had an Easter. I remember we went to Easter dinner at night because we couldn't do it at noon. We sat down. They brought our meal. My wife gets a call. We have to pick it all up, take it to memory care. We had to go at 10:30 at night, middle of the night, whatever. And so we went through this for a year or better. And my father-in-law dies, and all of these things have happened. And he died while I'm on a plane coming back from Nicaragua on top of it. And so I'm not there to support my wife, even though I wanted to be. These things happen, and why I say this is because 6 months later, she gets the shingles, almost to the day before we're supposed to go on vacation. I've always threatened her. It's because she was having to go with me that she got shingles. But she protests greatly on that one. But it's interesting. The stresses that you're under, this is what happens. It begins to change how you are and your whole deal. And so the higher the stress, you become much more vulnerable. And so, there are a lot of people like that. We're more vulnerable when we're under stress. That's why when you come to Luke's version of the temptation of Jesus, Jesus is tempted under great stresses. Think about that. He has been fasting for 40 days. Do you know the term hangry? My family knows the term hangry. And because when we have a kid in the back seat and they start getting messy, we stop and get things. It may not be good things. I'm just saying any kind of sugar will get me through. But he's been fasting for 40 days, and he's looking his life in the face and knows how his life is going to end, how brutal it's going to be, and how terrible it's going to be, and what's going to happen in this, and how he's going to be oppressed by those around him. He has all these stresses. And it's in that moment that Satan comes. And what Satan does, he offers to alleviate his stress. Here are some stones. Why don't you turn those into bread and eat? Yeah. I can give you the world if you'll just stand, if you have to worship me. You don't have to suffer. Satan always wants to relieve our stress. Yeah, but it's not going to relieve our stress. It's only going to be do it now, not later. And so when Luke writes it, he says he ended the temptation, but he departed him until a more opportune time. Just because stress is there and you tend to eliminate, there's going to be another time, another moment. And so what we see in Joseph is a great amount of trust. More trust than I don't know if I could have done this or not. That's an interesting problem, what you see in Joseph. He's sold to Potiphar. And it says that Potiphar is the captain of the guard, an Egyptian who bought him from the Ishmaelites and who brought him down there. A couple of things. What captain of the guard means. It means he's also the chief jailer, and what it really means is he's in charge of death row. He's there to make sure people suffer and die. That's his job. You're going to be pretty hardened from that job. You don't care. Human life is worthless. I kill them every day. What difference does it make? And that's the kind of man Joseph is going to work for. But it also says in the next verse, but the Lord was with Joseph. That's interesting because Joseph is all alone, but he's not all alone. When we have problems, we're not all alone. God is with us. The Lord is with us. If you never keep that in mind, that no matter where I go and what I do, that the Lord is with me, you will be a lot better off. It's only when you feel like the Lord has forsaken me. The words on the cross are important. Why have you forsaken me? God turns his back is the way some people put it, but there's this sense of I've got to have God with me to survive. Now the result of that was important because it says the master saw that. He saw his world going better than it had ever been. I don't believe that Potiphar was a believer in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But he saw something different and had to surmise that there was something going on that he couldn't know about. And so, because the Lord caused everything to go well with him. He succeeded. He was getting better. And so Joseph was put in charge of everything that he had. There's an interesting concept here, and that is when we do what God wants, his blessings spill over to other people. When we're blessed, they get blessed. One of the best ways to help someone else is to do what God wants you to do, because your blessing will bleed over. And it says the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. It wasn't because anything going on about Potiphar, but because of Joseph. So he left everything in charge of Joseph, and because of him, he didn't have any concern about anything. Potiphar could relax for the first time in years. If you're a slave owner, you have to worry about being stolen from or having your work done. He didn't have that problem. It says the only thing he concerned with is food he ate. That's because poisonings were a great big deal then. And so it's just, they had food tasters that we're going to find out next week in that lesson. And so everything's rolling along pretty well. Joseph, though, with the Lord's blessing, showed himself a man of trust and character. This is what we see in Joseph's life. I think there's a question that has to be asked, and that is, when people look at us, do they see trust and character? Or do they see everything but that? For Joseph, that's what he showed himself to be. And then, everything's going great. And then, suddenly things change. It says that very seldom do we get scriptural descriptions of someone's appearance. But we do it here. It says that Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. Now we know what that means because we ran across it once. You go back to Genesis chapter 29, when the first time Jacob sees Rachel, the one he loves, he doesn't love any of the other wives. He only loves Rachel. He loves her. And it says that she was beautiful in form and appearance. Exactly the same phrase that describes Joseph. He's like his mother. But you see, here's the problem that he's been blessed with a handsome appearance. And that may not be a great blessing to him at this moment. But he's like his mother in that way. And so there is this direct attack that begins. The direct attack is that the master's wife comes to him and without any varnish on this says, lie with me. Wow. Why? Probably because that's how she maintained control. He was his property, and she could make him do whatever she wanted him to do. And even if he did, she now can control him because she could say, he slept with me. Joseph is now in a no-win situation. If he says yes, he's got problems. If he says no, he has problems. Sometimes Satan puts us in what we consider no-win situations. And so he goes through this. Now, what's your impression of Potiphar's wife? Not very good, okay. There's words we don't use in church to describe her, yeah. She is a master manipulator who wants to control people on her terms. There are people who do this on a regular basis, and we know them, we experience them, we don't like them, but we experience them anyway. And so she's got this for Joseph, and it says, but he refused. I want you to think about what that really means to Joseph. He refused. You never refuse her, because her husband can have you killed. He refused. But he refused for a reason, and he tells the reason. He says, behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in this house, and he's put everything in my charge. First thing he says, my master has trust in me. If I do this, I will have betrayed my trust. But then he goes on to say, but it's not even about that. He says, how then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Every sin is not a sin against people, it's a sin against God, always. And ultimately. That's what David said. When he commits adultery with Bathsheba and commits murder, he says, against you and only you have I sinned. He says that in Psalm 51. Every sin is a sin against God, even though it may hurt people. But he knows that if he does this, this is the wrong thing. The wrong thing. No matter what happens, it's the wrong thing. So what do you make of that response? A lot of faith. Is it good? Effective? The only correct response for a godly person. Now, what's interesting is this doesn't stop it. See, what we think is, if I do this one thing, this will stop this. It's not going to stop it. Here's why I think he does this. In Colossians 3 and verse 23, Paul is writing to the Colossians, and this is a section where he's writing to slaves. He knows one of them. His name is Onesimus. He writes and he says, you need to obey your master. But he says it's not because you're afraid of your master. He says, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men. When you know that God's watching you and you're working for God, no matter what your job is, you're going to be in better shape. Because the boss can do whatever he wants to, but he can't affect your life, inevitably. Now, the question is, was Joseph really tempted? And I think he probably was, because he has to give the response. There are always people who say, well, Joseph really just didn't want to, and so he just kind of said, no, thank you. This is not like, I don't like coconut. My wife loves coconut. She loves having coconut cake. I said, fix you one. Because I'm not tempted. He said, well, I can't eat a whole cake by myself. I said, but I'm not going to eat it. This isn't coconut for him. There's something real going on because he has to respond to it. And so his response comes in 4 ways, really. First of all, he has this direct response to temptation, and he has 4 reasons. 4 reasons are he respects the trust that has been placed in him. He's got something to say about his character. My character is on the line when I do this. So I would betray my trust, and I could not live with myself if I did that. Secondly, he has respect for Potiphar. He knows Potiphar still is in charge, and Potiphar can care for him. He wants to do the right thing for Potiphar. He's thinking about his master. The other thing, though, is he has respect for the master's marriage. I find that interesting. That one of the things he sees is their relationship is sacred, and he's not going to be the one to break it. One of the biggest problems with adultery is the people who commit it don't have any respect for each other's marriages. That's a real problem. And then he has a respect for God. All of that is there. Somebody has to have those 4 pieces in their room. That's why that passage we read earlier about the opportune time. He gives the answer, the right answer, the answer that should have stopped all of this, but it wasn't over. Never is. Because temptation, when it's repelled, becomes more and more constant. Here's what he did, though. He built a fence to keep him out of danger. The Pharisees, for all of their bad traits, they had one good trait. That is, they did not want people to violate the law of God. And so all those laws, such as how you wash and what you eat and what you don't eat, and how far you go on the Sabbath and how far you don't, what you do on the Sabbath, what you don't, those were for one reason. Those were called the Pharisaic fence. And that was, we don't want you to get too close and fall off. And so we will build a fence 45 feet away from the cliff to keep you there, keep you from doing that. Now, we have a term in our language called the Ulysses contract. The Ulysses contract is based upon the story of Ulysses, who is going to sail past the island of the Sirens, and the Sirens sing this wonderful song that drives men crazy, and they're captive on their little island, and they are never seen again. Ulysses has heard about all of the song, and so he wants to hear this song, but he doesn't want to be captured, so he has his men last him to the mast, and he says to them, do not cut me loose for any reason, and when you get finished, I want you to get candle wax and plug your ears so you can't hear it. And then they set sail toward this island. So when he gets there, the siren song overwhelms him, almost drives him mad. But because he was tied to the mast ahead of time, he could stand the siren song. That's a Ulysses contract. This is what he had. He said, I'm going to approach my life this way. I have trust, I have faith in my master, I believe in the master's marriage, and I believe in God, and I'm not going to violate those. I think he did that ahead of time. Yeah, he prepared. He had this fence around him to keep him out of danger. Question is, do you and I have it? That's kind of tough. If you're on a diet, Do you go to the refrigerator? Or do you sell the refrigerator? Do you padlock the refrigerator? That's not just a suggestion. I'm not here to give. I am not an internet influencer who will give you bad advice. You know they don't give you bad advice, don't you? Go ahead and eat Tide Pods. But he builds this fence. But then there's this ambush. And one day, it says one day, we don't know when it was, how long it was. He goes into the house to do his work, and none of the men were there. He's been trying to avoid her, by the way. And she caught him by his garment and said, "Lie with me." And he left his garment in her hand and fled to go out of the house. And as soon as she saw the garment in her hand and he had fled out of the house, something begins to happen. It's interesting. I remember this story for one good reason. We had an intern here years ago. And what we would do during internships, we would teach people one thing about how to do evangelism. And there was this, Robert had a class called Personal Evangelism Training. If you're old enough, you know it, and I've used it forever. And it's very successful, at least for me. And I can't say that for everybody. But I remember this one, what the process was, you heard the story told to you, then you would tell it back, and there are 5 different lessons. And so this intern we're in second lesson, this intern says, we explain the lesson to him, we teach it, we get to where he's telling it, and he says, and she snatched the garment off of his naked behind. I don't read this story the same anymore. Okay. He still had a naked behind, one way or another. Yeah. It just go down to the first grade and talk about his naked behind. See how long you last down there. Dustin will have you out of that. If you want to get out of something, there's the way you do it. You talk about the naked behind. Anyway, that's enough about. But here he goes. He's leaving naked. He has nothing, and she has everything in her hand. She's got all the proof that she needs. And sure enough, when Pharaoh comes in, I love this. Pharaoh gets in. The first thing she hits him with: if you're a wife, don't hit your husband with all your problems when he walks in the door. That's just wise advice. She hits him when he first gets in the door. And she says, "He came in, he tried to rape me." He said, "and I cried out." The reason she says that is because the difference between a rape and consensual sex has to do with the fact that someone cries out, "Stop." She says, "I cried out. And I've got this robe here in my hand. You see, this is what he left behind." And then she blames her husband, "That Hebrew slave whom you have brought here among us. Not my fault. You brought this guy here, this Hebrew from over there, and you didn't know anything about him. Here he is trying to defoil me. I mean, I don't understand what you did to me. This is your fault." Husbands play the blame game too, so don't. I can take you back to Genesis 3 and show you that. But he got angry, and Joseph's master took him and put him into prison. Read, he put him in prison waiting to kill him. Because that's kind of what that means. Now, here's the problem. Joseph does right and seems to get punished. Is that fair? Not fair. The sooner we realize that life isn't fair, the better off we are. That's a hard concept to get. I've got grandchildren who say that's not fair. Last night, I forgot what happened. We had them, and the sister got one thing, and the little brother says, "I want an ice cream sandwich. You can't have one." That's not fair. We always want life to equal out. It doesn't always equal out. But then, why doesn't God rescue him? Why didn't he swoop in and say, "I take care of this"? Yeah, eventually what happens, God uses this. Now, I don't know that Joseph knows that quite well. If you're stuck in this situation, do you sit down and say, oh, don't worry, things are good. The Lord's going to use this. Even if I get killed, the Lord's going to use this. Most people don't do that. But see, God doesn't walk in and rescue us because God's got bigger things to do. He's got more important things to do. And He uses the moments that come along, even bad ones, for us. Okay, and we know from the rest of the story, He changes, the situation does some things that create, and we've got a long lesson later on about that. Temptation comes up to us in times of weakness, not in times of strength. The Satan is never going to come to you when you're sitting in church. You do know that. He's going to do it when you're weakest, when you're most depleted, when you don't know what to do. And I always like what Thomas Carlyle said, adversity is sometimes hard upon man, but for one man who can stand prosperity, there are 100 who will stand adversity. Sometimes when things are going well, you're in problems. Satan can use the top of the ladder. Think about David. His life is peaceful. He has nothing to do. And that's the time the adultery and the murder happen. Top of his life, easy life, that's a danger. That's why Paul says, and this is the chapter in which we like to quote, that we are never tempted beyond that which we can bear. But part of this is also, therefore let anyone who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. If you think you're impervious to things, you're now dangerous. You're in danger. So you can't do it that way. Now, we learn from Joseph that when you are attacked, you either refuse or run. He does both of those, by the way. I always like what Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 5. He talks about the devil being a roaming lion looking for someone to devour. And he says, resist him. Stand firm in your faith. The word stand firm means to plant your heels in and don't move. I don't know about you. If a lion's after me, I'm not standing there. I'm running. And that's the other option. If you can't stand firm, get out of the situation. Joseph, at some point in time in his life, and I don't know when this happened, but he kind of got to the point where he realized that God's reward is more important than human punishment. Until we get the idea that whatever God gives us is more important than what man dishes out, we're always going to struggle with problems. And the way you learn trust is really like God is going to do something better than this. And so next week, we're going to look at prison dreams and all the dreams. I ask you to do your dreaming before you come to church.